Welcome back to Synthetic Man's incredibly cynical breakdown of the Summer Games Fest. And much like last year, it is somehow even worse than the lowest lows of the last few E3s. It is truly impressive how bleak the future of gaming looks. I know many of you want to see the return of the woke counter, but first of all, there are way too many woke moments to count here. Almost every single game shown had some form of left-wing propaganda. I know that sounds ridiculous, like I'm going off the fucking deep end. Synthetic Grifter is just telling his audience what they want to hear, right? I'm seeing woke in everything, as the tourists like to say. But my god, dude, it doesn't get much worse than this. I watched 6 hours of these showcases, and maybe 15 minutes of that contained games I'd be actually interested in playing. I have never seen so many diverse female protagonists in my entire life. Like I said in a previous video, this is a showcase of future flops. These games don't even have to make money because they're funded by BlackRock and the Canadian government. If you think indie games are exempt from this, you are delusional. Obviously, the AAA games are no better. There are man jaws galore. I feel bad for anybody who's been begging for a Perfect Dark remake or reboot. Holy shit, talk about a monkey's paw wish. But for this video, I'm going to change up my coverage a little bit. Like I just said, there's not going to be any woke counter, there's no point. And honestly, there's way too much material here for me to condense down into like a 30-minute video. So instead of covering everything that happened during the show, I'm instead going to review each showcase individually and cover the highlights. The highlights being mostly negative, of course. Since I never made a video on the Sony State of Play, I'll briefly give my thoughts on it at the end if you're curious. But without further ado, here is the worst gaming showcase of all time, the Summer Games Fest 2024. Starting off, we had the biggest show, the main Summer Games Fest showcase, which was 2 hours long, yet just showed absolute slop for the vast majority of that runtime. Shockingly, there weren't like breaks for musical numbers or celebrities like the Game Awards. It was truly mostly game trailers, and yet somehow nothing looked interesting outside of a handful of games. Now, of course, that handful of games were games that I wanted to play, like Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, which will no doubt be the chud game of the year.
Praise be to our Lord Jesus Christ.
If we want to fight against all of the propaganda forced into our media, I can't think of a better game to support. So even if the gameplay of the first wasn't exactly my thing, I certainly will be buying and reviewing this, and I have no doubt that it will be a quality game at the very least. Other highlights of the show were more Monster Hunter Wilds gameplay, which I personally am somewhat excited for, Dragon Ball Sparking Zero, which I will definitely be buying and reviewing. There's no way to know if the gameplay will actually be good, because every time they've shown us uncut gameplay, there were certain little things that looked questionable, but they also showed off that it looks like the new story mode is going to have some kind of what-if system where you can make choices throughout the story to play unique scenarios. There's no telling if that will branch off into its own storyline or if it'll just be one-off missions. But still, that's a pretty good idea. I've always liked what-ifs in the Dragon Ball games. I have been personally asking for a new Tenkaichi game for 15 years, so I am happy to see that it's finally getting a sequel, and my expectations are incredibly low, so I can't imagine I'll really be disappointed. There are a few more interesting games as well. There was more footage for Metaphor ReFantasio, which is by the creators of Persona. I'll no doubt give it a try. There's Phantom Blade Zero, which is a fast-paced action game that might be a Sekiro-like, or maybe just a hack-and-slash game with some Souls-light mechanics. Hard to tell at this point, but the gameplay did look pretty fun. There was a little bit of gameplay shown for the re-release of Sonic Generations with new Shadow the Hedgehog levels, which I will definitely be purchasing, and no, I don't care that this is effectively a remaster with a DLC stapled to it. Sonic Generations is still way more fun than the vast majority of games that come out each year, so I'm sure the Shadow the Hedgehog levels will make it worth a buy for me personally. There's also the mech game that kind of looks like an Armored Core clone called Mecha Break. That looks fairly interesting. And finally, the game I'm sure all of you wanted me to mention, the Killer Bean game. Yes, you know, the ancient internet meme, the Killer Bean animation. Yes, this looks like pure slop, like a streamer bait game, but I'll be honest, I actually want to play this at least. At bare minimum, I expect to be able to laugh at it, which is still being entertained on some level, something modern gaming doesn't understand. Games are supposed to be fun. This looks fun, even if maybe for the wrong reasons. So yes, I am kind of looking forward to the Killer Bean game's release. And that's it for all the good stuff in the show. The rest of the trailers shown ranged from mediocre slop to actual leftist propaganda being shoved down our throats for the millionth fucking time. Like I said, it wouldn't even be worth it to have a woke counter. All you have to do is count the amount of brown female protagonists on screen, and trust me, it only gets worse from here. The other shows actually have even more diverse female protagonists than this. This fucking Stanley Parable guy is making a game where you play as a brown female barista who wants to be a great warrior, but she's stuck serving tea to people. I mean, what the fuck? No, I don't care if the game has this morbid twist where you then go murder all the people because she finally snaps. So who cares? That would still be woke in its own way. Oh man, tiny woman goes psycho and murders a bunch of people. And if it's not that, then it's just boring ass Animal Crossing-esque chore simulator. I don't care, man. And then there's the climbing survival game, once again with a diverse female character. There is an indie game where you play as some Scottish dude leading an army, and they slipped in a black Scottish woman and thought we wouldn't notice. And there was an Abby Zilla type character as well. Look forward to seeing more muscular women in the other showcases. There was even a higher budget adventure game where you play as an Indian woman. Of course, they only showed like 3 seconds of gameplay, so I couldn't even really tell you what type of game it is. Oh, and we can't forget the blatant shilling of Alan Wake 2 once again. It's obvious Remedy is about to go bankrupt, so now a year later they're releasing physical copies of the game, and of course DLC to try and bring back the fans by having the chick from Control and the dude from Quantum Break. Do not fall for this desperation. Let Remedy die. They get what they fucking deserve. And even discounting all of the woke stuff, there were just so many games that nobody asked for or cares about on any level. Like the Lego Horizon Zero Dawn game. I mean, really? Sony is just not gonna give up trying to make Aloy a thing. It's never gonna happen. She looks like fucking Nikocado Avocado. The only thing that's interesting about Horizon are the robot dinosaurs. The humans are disgusting. Oh, and as a punch in the balls, there's a teaser for a new Batman Arkham game. And guess what? It's a VR game. And they purposely don't show any gameplay. As the biggest cringe moment of the show, we had the creators of Among Us come out on stage and tell us they've started a fund for indie games. I'm sure they will only support the greatest that indie games have to offer. Games made purely for fun and definitely don't have any modern politics in them. Holy shit.
Eka, creative director of Outer Loop Games, makers of Thirsty Suitors and Falcon Age.
What?
In our new
Thirsty
game,
Suitors?
In an upgradable mech and cook up tasty dishes for local communities. Fight off corpos, discover new dosa recipes.
Oh my god.
And reunite with your
Fight off lagging corpos. You're being funded by a soon-to-be corpo that made all its money off of a fucking meme game. Maybe when there's an Among Us movie, and a TV show, and
amazing indie games aren't the
I don't
only
know.
thing coming
How much
out of
money do they have to
Ubisoft.
make before they're a
Did you know that
corpo?
there's going to be an Among Us TV show?
Well, I was joking!
Sounds like you did.
I was joking!
Among Us TV
Oh
show.
my god,
Check
no
out this
fucking
sneak
way! Oh, and how could I forget? There was also shilling for Inside Out 2, and guess who was in the crowd? None other than our favorite YouTuber, Yong Yeah, who despite his incredibly terrible voice acting reputation, somehow landed a role in Inside Out 2 as a fake video game character.
Welcome to your eternal fate.
Oh, even one line sounded terrible. Yeah, I really have nothing to say about this one. And as for the last real highlight of the show, Blumhouse has now gone from just making horror movies to now horror games. And they show a compilation of indie games here, some of which look promising, but of course there was one that had an incredibly diverse art style. But I can't really say I was particularly interested in any single game. The entire rest of the show was just completely mediocre, forgettable slop. Even though there were a handful of games that looked interesting, it was just so unbelievably boring. There was so much garbage there that it was truly awful. Worse than some of the worst E3s, without a doubt. Now, moving on to the Xbox Game Showcase. This was probably the best one, but it definitely still wasn't good. Its greatest strength is that it was only an hour long, mercifully. Starting off with the highlights, we have Doom: The Dark Ages, a prequel to Doom 2016 and Eternal. Now, if you've been a fan of the channel a long time, you'll know I was highly critical of Doom Eternal. I really was not a fan of the direction that game took with its core gameplay mechanics, namely having to switch weapons constantly, and the high-level difficult gameplay funneling you down a certain particular play style. It felt very autistic, bordering on speedrunner territory. So although the tiny bit of gameplay here looks cool, we won't know until the game comes out if the devs decided to listen to some of the more casual players' criticisms of the game, or if they're going to try and please the cult fan base that has formed around Eternal's gameplay. At the end of the day, if it ends up being a quality game, I'll just admit it isn't for me, but I sure as hell will share my distaste in the review. The next highlight was actually a new IP called Expedition 33. Now, when I first saw this, I was a little bit confused. The gameplay looked strange. I could barely even tell it was a turn-based RPG. But after giving the trailer a second look, I gotta say I am cautiously optimistic about this game. The first good sign is that there's actually an attractive female character in this, which is mind-blowing for a modern game, especially given almost every other trailer in this showcase featured an ugly, androgynous, or straight-up man-faced woman. So seeing the cute little redhead in this trailer certainly caught my attention, but also it seems like they're almost going for a Paper Mario or Mario and Luigi style turn-based RPG system where they have sort of mini quick-time events or maybe some kind of other reactive gameplay while the enemy is attacking or you're attacking, so you're not just picking your moves and waiting for stuff to happen. It's kind of hard to tell given how little gameplay was shown in the trailer, but I can certainly admire a Western studio calling back to the olden days of classic JRPGs, so I'm certainly willing to give this one a try. Then we have the Metal Gear Solid 3 remake, which I am surprisingly cautiously optimistic for. Although I certainly would not trust Konami on any level, especially seeing that they let Bloober Team touch Silent Hill 2. I have to admit, using Metal Gear Solid 5's gameplay mechanics and reusing the original voice lines from the original version of the game, it actually looks pretty good. Again, I'm not going to tell people to go out and pre-order it, but I did like what was shown here. A game that some of you will likely be excited for is the Age of Mythology remake. Although I don't play RTS games, this one looks like it's untainted by modernity, so to speak. No race-swapped gods, just kind of looks like a fun game if you're into that sort of thing. Stalker 2 was the next game that looked pretty promising. A lot of people are definitely excited for it, and the gameplay looks solid. The only thing that maybe was a little bit of a red flag is there's randomly a black guy in Ukraine. So I don't know if that's a sign that Zelensky himself or his goons got their hands on the game studio, or if the devs are doing this as a fuck you to Russia. Maybe he's a legitimately well-written character with an explanation how he ended up there. I guess we won't know for sure until the game releases, but his presence certainly stood out to me. And for the final highlight of the show, we had the reveal for a Gears of War prequel. Finally, another game for the dude bros to chew on. However, I think there's definitely a bit too much hype around this reveal. It was just a CG trailer. The last couple Gears games weren't that good, apparently, and I'm not even a fan of Gears of War. I don't even like cover-based shooters in general. I think in most games, it is incredibly lazy and boring style of gameplay that requires little skill. And although Gears of War is definitely one of the better ones, it also unfortunately created this trend of copycats creating easily the worst subgenre of shooter on the market back in the 360 era. Yes, it's definitely a good thing that this will hopefully be a game made for straight men. I just don't like the style of gameplay. Now for the bad parts of the Xbox showcase. Don't worry, there were easily as many bad trailers as there were good. First off, we have the new Dragon Age game that looks so goddamn cheap, it's unbelievable. I didn't even know it was Dragon Age until they revealed the title at the end. It looks like a fucking mobile game, and it's already been confirmed that all of the characters will be pansexual, so I'm sure this is going to be the new Baldur's Gate 3 of degeneracy, but without the quality game design. Hopefully BioWare dies for good this time. I can't believe they've managed to stick around this long, churning out crap. Next up, we had the trailer for the first expansion of Starfield, and as you guys know, I'm a huge fan. I'm not convinced! I'm sure this was already well into development by the time Starfield released, so there's no way it's gonna actually fix anything. I'm sure it'll be more slop, but if you guys want to see me review it, feel free to tell me in the comments. Next up, we've got some gameplay for South of Midnight. We have to pay reparations, so every white person here has to pre-order the Mega Ultimate Edition of this game. It's the only way we can erase our white guilt. Am I right, Redditor? And of course, it looks like a cheap-ass middleware cash grab. I find it hilarious that this was the first uncut gameplay we got to see during the Xbox Game Showcase, because they knew they had to show a little bit of gameplay to fool some people into thinking this is a real game instead of a propaganda piece. And of course, it just looks like slop. Not to mention the low frame rate animation literally hurts my eyes just watching it. I'm not exaggerating. This is just yet another game that's going to bomb and be more fuel to the fire that gamers are all racist for not wanting to buy games that don't represent them on any level and don't look appealing for that matter. Moving on. And just a few minutes later, we get another game with a dark-skinned female protagonist using a flintlock pistol, an axe, and some magic or some shit. This is just getting comical at this point. This is exactly why I didn't do a woke counter for this video. There are more woke games than just normal fucking games at this point by a considerable margin. These devs could have made some charming cult classic middleware game. Instead, they gave into the corporate funding and now the game's gonna bomb. I don't want to get too edgy in this video at the risk of getting banned, but at what point do we as a collective have to realize that voting with our wallet is not enough, because these investment firms effectively have unlimited money, especially if they're getting that money from Microsoft, and yes, Microsoft is one of the biggest contributors to BlackRock, or if they're getting that money directly from the government, which the Canadian government has funded many woke games at this point. Somehow, I think simply not buying these games is not enough. Now, to not suggest something that would get me banned, I would just say right-wing people need to get into game development, or at the very least, people who are willing to put aside their personal politics and are intelligent and hopefully have a lot of life experience would get into game development like they did 20 years ago, but that is looking less and less likely, especially in America where everyone is either a political extremist or a brain-dead NPC. Anyway, the next terrible trailer was for the Perfect Dark reboot. And just like the Dragon Age trailer, I couldn't even tell it was Perfect Dark until they revealed the title. And Crystal Dynamics, famous for having shrunk Lara Croft's magnificent breasts, have now given Joanna Dark a massive fucking man jaw. Imagine my shock. Honestly, I don't even care about the gameplay they showed here. It looked pretty fucking generic, with the coolest moments being special abilities that just give you aimbot, which is probably my least favorite FPS ability. And yeah, I don't know, I just can't care about this because I already know it's gonna be woke as fuck. It doesn't even look anything like Perfect Dark. Just let this game be yet another reminder that if you're begging for a reboot, a remake, or a sequel of a beloved old franchise, that modern gaming will absolutely ruin it for you. Then we got a trailer for a Diablo 4 expansion that doesn't even look like a video game. It's just a short film of an Asian woman crying and screeching. Oh, that'll definitely sell me on your game. Then we get another CG trailer for the Fable reboot, remake, sequel, whatever. We get to see more of the absolutely disgustingly hideous protagonist. The villain is also a woman, which is just great. Even the retired great hero has like a bloated face. Nobody's allowed to be attractive in this universe. Look, man, I just don't want to play ugly games. I don't care that I can make my own protagonist. I don't have to play as the woman, obviously. The game is just promoting ugliness in general. I don't want to play an ugly game. Is that so bad? I think we all know it's going to be shit anyway. So, moving on. Then we get a trailer for Mixtape, which legitimately just looks like a movie. Describing it as a movie game doesn't even really do it justice. It's even framed like a movie in the trailer. The trailer itself is cut to look like an 80s movie. And of course, you play as a woman in this too. So, you know, I already didn't care, but now I'm annoyed on top of being apathetic. And of course, this is another game trying to ride on the coattails of Spider-Verse with the low frame rate, ugly animation. As if I needed another reason to not want to play it. And you might be surprised to hear me even mention this next game, but Flight Simulator 2024 somehow managed to slip in propaganda. A woman even... We're really starting to reach peak Clown World levels, aren't we? Next up is a trailer for yet another Life is Strange game, bringing back the original protagonist for another adventure, and this new art style just looks ugly, honestly. And I don't even care about these games outside of my stream chat just begging me to play them because they have nuclear levels of cringe and usually some political propaganda alongside it, so even though I'm sure it'll be dog shit, I'll probably end up streaming this at some point. Then we had a trailer for the new Indiana Jones game by Machine Games, and may I remind you that Machine Games made Wolfenstein 2: The New Colossus possibly one of the most woke games ever made. It was far ahead of its time at release, featuring racism, miscegenation, bizarre female supremacy / fetish content, glorification of communism, and somehow managed to make the Nazis look like the good guys. So I expect much of the same from this Indiana Jones game, if not worse. No doubt the female character will be the real protagonist, will save Indy on multiple occasions, and will be better than him in every way. Already this dialogue looks incredibly cringe. The only gameplay shown was like 10 seconds of vertical slice cut shit. So no doubt this will be crap. And the rest of the trailers were just for games I didn't really personally care about, like Call of Duty Black Ops 6 and State of Decay 3, and a few other notable ones, but the only reason I would rate Xbox as the best show is just because it was only an hour long and there were a handful of decent looking games, but there sure as hell were a lot of bad trailers here. There is a comical amount of political propaganda being shoved in our faces at this point. I know I'm beginning to sound like a broken record here, but video games are not being made for gamers anymore. They're being made for investors. They're being funded by megalomaniacal evil overlords straight out of a fucking comic book. It doesn't even feel like reality anymore, but these people legitimately do not view you and me as human beings. We are cattle to them. And this is the slop they want to feed us for the rest of time. Now, for the last two shows I watched, there really wasn't much to actually talk about. We had the PC gaming show, which is legitimately the worst gaming show I have ever seen in my entire life. It was 2 straight hours of indie games and some middleware budget PC games that I had zero interest in. And in between the trailers, I had to listen to some of the cringiest interactions I've ever seen between this middle-aged bald soy boy and LeVar Burton's daughter, who is a absolute nepo baby who has only failed upward. Those of you who are fans of Rooster Teeth in the past will know exactly what I'm talking about. The only thing that kept my chat mildly entertained was a display of mommy milkers every once in a while. But yes, I'm going to save you a summary. Even though there may have been 2 or 3 mildly interesting indie games, it was really just 2 hours of utter torturous shit. And as for the final show, Ubisoft Forward, it felt more like a presentation for investors than one for gamers. It was basically just an hour of saying, we're still supporting all our live service games, make sure to buy all the DLC and the microtransactions. Until we get a new 3D Rayman game, I don't give a fuck about anything Ubisoft could have to show me. There were only 2 real games shown worth discussing here. The first one being Star Wars Outlaws, which took up about a third of the show on its own. And look, man, I was never a big fan of Star Wars. Yes, I like the original movies, of course, and I grew up with the prequels, but I acknowledge that they're terrible movies. I just kind of like what they did for the Star Wars universe, but I have no personal attachment to Star Wars as a franchise anymore. I haven't since The Force Awakens came out. And it's already confirmed that this is going to be another open-world Ubisoft game full of their usual slop content, with incredibly basic stealth mechanics, generic third-person shooting, probably terrible quest writing, and of course you have to play as this Goblina woman, who is yet another victim of modern politics, having her face being stretched into this gross androgynous creature, all to not offend the cult of autogynephilia. So yes, I have absolutely zero interest in this game, despite them showing off like 20 minutes of it. I don't really have much to say because it definitely didn't look interesting. It feels like a game I've already played like 30 times before. The only moment that caught my attention is when they unintentionally shit in Bethesda's mouth by showing you flying from space directly onto a planet with just a short fake loading screen, which is 10 times better than having to watch like the 3 minimum just to walk on a planet in Starfield. As for the other game shown, of course, it was a lot more gameplay for Assassin's Creed Shadows. The combat is clearly just a copy-paste of Valhalla's, with the same health bar, stagger system, parry system, 4 abilities that you can use at any time. At least it looks like the 2 main characters play significantly different from each other. So if you want the more classic Assassin's Creed gameplay, you'll play as Naue. But even then, it's fucking Ubisoft stealth. There's a part in the trailer where she just straight up sprints up to a dude and assassinates him just because she's standing in the dark. I just love how, like, 25 years later, we still have shittier stealth mechanics than fucking Thief. But I guess if you're buying Assassin's Creed, you kinda already know what you're in for. It's not like there's anything I could say to convince an NPC who's already decided to buy this game not to. I do, however, find it incredibly hilarious that this game is pretending that people wouldn't be freaking the fuck out if they saw a 6-foot black man walking around in feudal Japan.
I am a stranger, yes, but you have nothing to fear from me.
Yeah, I've seen videos of old Japanese women today freaking the fuck out when they see a black man. And you expect, all the way back in this time, they'd be like, oh yeah, so what a friendly youngster. Clown-pilled. I'm becoming clown-pilled. I can only laugh at this. Even the dogs don't bark at him. That might be the least realistic thing in this entire game. So yeah, despite the massive backlash to the trailers, and this being an obvious copy-paste job of previous games, much like most of the other Assassin's Creed games, I'm sure this will somehow manage to sell millions of copies, because the average consumer has such embarrassingly bad taste. They will buy the same game over and over again. Alright, let's just move to the conclusion. Ubisoft show sucked, obviously. Still not as bad as the PC gaming show. Xbox One, not that that really means much. If you're wondering what I thought of the Sony State of Play, it also was kind of terrible. That fucking Concord game looks like the most designed by committee shit I've ever seen. Guardians of the Galaxy character design and humor plus hero shooter equals some of the worst cape shit millennial garbage I think I've ever seen in my life. Luckily, that bit of Monster Hunter Wilds gameplay and the Astrobot game surprisingly looked good, but yeah, the show was pretty weak. At least it was only like 35 minutes. So is this the worst E3/Summer Games Fest of all time? Yes, definitely, without a doubt, dude. I don't want to repeat myself every single year, but I truly miss the presentation cringe of E3. And I miss genuinely huge game reveals that everyone was excited for. I get the feeling that most hardcore gamers like myself have simply stopped playing new games and they just play old games, and I really wouldn't blame you. Honestly, that's the best advice I could give you If you haven't completely given up on this hobby, just play some of the greatest games of all time in your backlog. They're better than anything that releases today, no matter what lefty shills will tell you about indie games. They're full of just as much, if not more, propaganda than AAA games, because they're actually made by leftists. They insert their ideology into their games. They just can't fucking help themselves. That's exactly what my last video was about, so I'd recommend checking out Sincerity is Dead if you'd like to see how a Morrowind clone somehow managed to fit in communist propaganda and LGBTQ shit and a complete lack of any player choice and horrible gameplay, and honestly that game was just bad on like every level. If you don't want to watch that video, the takeaway from that is don't play Dread Delusion. But yeah, as my apathy grows toward the gaming industry, I find it hard to truly rant about how bad all these shows were. Honestly, the worst part was just wasting 6 hours of my life watching them. There's really no point in watching the live shows. You might as well just wait until they're over and then watch the few trailers for games that look interesting, and you'll save yourself a lot of time and energy. All of these idiot tourists and gaslighters who always say that I'm being hyperbolic when I say gaming is dying or gaming is dead. I mean, did you watch the show? This is supposed to be the biggest gaming showcase of the year. The replacement for E3. This is what's supposed to get us excited for the future. And all I saw was a bunch of blatant fucking propaganda and exploiting nostalgia for the millionth time. There was maybe 2 new IPs that looked interesting out of well over 100 games shown over the course of that 6 hours. That is fucking bleak, dude. So yeah, I'm gonna say it for the millionth time. Gaming is dead. Yes, there are a few good games that still come out each year. The best game I played this year was actually an indie game, Yellow Taxi Goes Vroom, a 3D collectathon platformer where you play as a taxi. So it's not like no good games come out anymore, but honestly, how literal does your definition of dead have to be? If you compare release lineups now to 20 years ago, it's fucking embarrassing. The fact that people were trying to pretend that 2023 was one of the greatest years in gaming history just shows you how far we've fallen. That's about it. See you next time, guys. I don't care what they teach you in school. My grandma told me Yasuke is the greatest samurai.